As the car nosed its way into the driveway, a white BMW pulled up alongside hers and just unleashed a salvo of gunfire. And she was shot 12 times. She said, well, we've got 100 million rand in outgoing payments which are about to leave Treasury. So she put a halt on them.
Yeah.
And that started the clock for her. It takes a special kind of psychopath to steal from a public hospital.
It was fascinating to me to see the role President Cyril Ramaphosa plays in your book. Quite a brave step. It comes late, but I think this could be some of the most revelatory stuff in the book.
When you have a policeman breaking ranks, standing before a bank of cameras and saying, our top ranks have been captured, the minister has been captured by not only business people, but elements of the underworld and drug cartels. Those were his words.
Yeah.
It's seismic.
On the 23rd of August 2021, Babita Deokaran, then Chief Financial Officer of the Gauteng Health Department, was gunned down outside her Johannesburg home. Just weeks before her murder, she sent a chilling message warning our lives could be in danger. 4 years on, News24 investigative journalist Jeff Wicks has published a gripping new book, The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die. It traces Babita's courageous fight against corruption, follows the trail of the money and the hitmen, and holds chilling clues about who really wanted her silenced. Jeff Wicks, welcome to SMWX.
Thanks for having me, Sizwe.
Thank you so much. You just published this important book, The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die, which I've made my way through. And can we start on the day of Babita's murder? Because one of the most harrowing parts of the book is how you detail what happened on that day. And as a country, we probably need to do the hard work of processing that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the narrative goes like this. It was a Monday, the 23rd of August, just coming out of winter, so it was still cold. And she left her house shortly before 7 o'clock in the morning to take her teenage daughter to school. She dropped her off, and then, as she would have on any other day, stopped at nearby Checkers, which is very close to her home, and bought groceries, and then drove home. As she was approaching her gate, she saw her helper on the side of the road, so she stopped for her. And as the car nosed its way into the driveway, a white BMW pulled up alongside hers and just unleashed a salvo of gunfire. And she was shot 12 times. And, I mean, by that point, the die had already been cast for her, but no one knew that then. And she died several hours later in hospital, thankfully surrounded by some of her family members who were able to make it there in time.
And in the book, you detail, the trauma of that event, how close, after reading some of the reports, the bullets actually were to her, her last moments. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, I mean, I've followed the story and investigated it, or tried to investigate it, for 4 years. And her final moments were something that I've often labored on, because you find yourself immersed in her story, and you try and place yourself in her position, not only in terms of what she found, but what she would have experienced in her final moments. And it's devastating. And the post-mortem report, which is in the book, or extracts of it, is a testament to the brutality of the attack. And her body told the story of it.
Who was Babita Deokaran, and why was she important?
So there's two answers to that question, and it's difficult to try bookend them. So there was the Babita Deokaran that we know. There's the dedicated civil servant who had obviously stumbled across financial malfeasance during the course of her work. And she's become something of an icon as a whistleblower. But that's only a title that she gained in death. She was always known for being an upright person, and she'd spent her career in the civil service. And then there's Babita, the human being. That's the mother to a teenage daughter. It's a loving sister. It's someone who protected her nieces and nephews fearlessly. And that's the story I tried to tell, is her story, which encompasses not only her work, but the life beyond that, because that's essentially what's been taken away. That's the high watermark for the Deokaran family, because, Babita the accountant was something of an afterthought. Sure. She was Babita the aunt, and they called her Bata. And she comes from an extremely tight-knit family who managed to, each in their own way, claw themselves out of poverty and make lives and careers for themselves. So she's an inspiration in many ways, but that's a part of her that not many people knew.
And in terms of the investigations that she was undertaking at the time and the threads on which she was pulling, why were so many people so angry about her not only uncovering but also stopping or at least attempting to stop payments to these contractors?
What she found at Tembisa Hospital was basically the crux of our entire investigation. And the way in which we followed the story and even told it changed a lot after we found the report that she'd filed 3 weeks before her murder. And I mean, investigative journalism is a lot of things, but it's often plotting things in context and on a timeline. And you file this report which says Tembisa Hospital is spending more than any other facility in our network. Not only more than any other facility, but all of the other facilities combined. And they're doing it in a way that raises significant red flags for procurement fraud. So what she did was file this report, and her recommendations were, we need an urgent forensic investigation because obviously something is amiss at Tembisa Hospital. One facility in the East Rand pushing out 850 million rands worth of transactions in the space of 4 months. And by so doing, she said, well, we've got 100 million rand in outgoing payments which are about to leave Treasury. So she put a halt on them.
Yeah.
And that started the clock for her. That was, that was the first link in the chain of disaster for her, because she had made herself an enemy of those who commanded these illicit revenue streams. And when you think about the sheer scale of the extraction, just the figures involved, it makes you understand why people would go to such great lengths to eliminate someone who stood between them and immense, eye-watering wealth.
I mean, there's so many tragic notes, but one of them is her attempts to obviously bring what she was uncovering to the attention of people within the Gauteng health sphere, and really some of them lying to her about taking it seriously, and ultimately those warnings not really being fully heeded.
Absolutely. And I think it's, again, part of the betrayal that Babita Deokaran was subjected to in many ways, because she felt like she had followed procedure. She had flagged these payments, and she felt like she had the support of her immediate superiors because that's what she was told. We have your back. We're going to do an investigation. Even when Babita, just days before her murder, raised the specter of a threat to say, we need to know what's happening in this. We need to move with haste, because the Tembisa guys, obviously she had some sort of sense by then of who she was dealing with. And her fears proved completely prescient. And, for me, as someone who every single day of my professional career looks at issues of corruption, this is the sort of dedicated and upright civil servant that is seldom seen. And because we were able to dive so deeply into her story and examine nearly every facet of her life, we found that document, and that became our lodestar as we tried to unravel exactly who were the people making the money behind all of these companies that she'd flagged.
How did you become interested in the story?
I've made a career as a crime reporter, and I joined News24's investigations team, and obviously my focus area is the criminal underworld and gangs and crime and justice. And, we were discussing before we started recording, but, assassinations have become so commonplace in South Africa. It's always the auditors. It's the accountants, people who know where the bodies are buried in the ledgers that become expendable. And they've become so commonplace that when Babita was murdered, we quickly found out exactly what position she occupied at Gauteng Health, chief accountant. And then I looked at the manner in which she was murdered. This was by no means, or in any stretch of the imagination, a botched hijacking or a robbery. Her cell phone and handbag were left on the passenger seat. There was no attempt to take anything. And So I think then I realized that there was intent. And then we tried to understand the why behind it, to say, well, why did this woman have to die? Because this is clearly not a random act of violence. There's obviously thought behind this. And then we started to tug on the threads, and immediately things started to fall out of the tree.
Yeah. And you were able to speak to her family members. You're able to chronicle some of those conversations in the book. Others decided they weren't ready to speak to you. What was it like being able to talk to people who are close to Babita?
I think it was a privilege. I think South Africa owes Babita Deokaran, all whistleblowers in fact, but in particular Babita Deokaran, an immense debt of gratitude. Her death has brought about the dismantling of these syndicates, which are responsible for pulling 2.3 billion rand out of the public health network, when we know how devastating the withdrawal of that money could be when those tax rands are not reaching their final destination.
Absolutely. Just on that, like, there's something about corruption in healthcare which is particularly
Absolutely
eye-watering.
It takes a special kind of psychopath to steal from a public hospital, especially when you've been inside a public hospital and you know the desperate situation faced by so many, and always the poorest of the poor. But in telling Babita's story, I'm so grateful to her family for giving me the honor of being the one to be able to tell it.
Yeah.
And it was difficult because you essentially have to learn about someone you've never met because you're writing an entire book about them. And so for me, it was just to go and spend time with them, just to sit and listen to their stories and how they told them, to give me an idea of who this person was. And everything I was told by her family members is completely congruent with what her colleagues had to say. That she would never waver from doing the right thing, even if it was difficult. And, she met her end because she stood against corruption. Prior to that, and something that very few people know, is that she was pushed out of the system, a corrupt system, to enable the advancement of tainted PPE contracts. Because if she was in her post, she would not have signed them. So she was a victim in many respects. And now the Deokaran family takes on that mantle. And to their credit, I view them in the same way that I view her. I think that they're heroes because they refuse to keep quiet about this. And they should never stop asking questions until they get some semblance of accountability and justice.
That was actually an incredible moment in the book, of which there are many, but where you reveal this message that was sent, I think, to a family WhatsApp group, where Babita Deokaran then says, by the way, I just wanted to tell you that a while ago I was suspended because I was effectively looking into corruption, and I'm going to keep holding the line. I just wanted to let you know that. It's like a Women's Day message or something. And you just read that with the benefit of hindsight, and it's just, you're gobsmacked.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to the person that she was. I mean, she never burdened her family with it. Not once. Even when her salary was stopped, which we know from the state capture playbook is part of the stratagem. You face trumped-up charges. They don't need to stick or be proven true, but they succeed in getting you out of your post. And then we make life uncomfortable for you until you leave, because then once you've left, we can install someone pliant. She's a hero for standing her ground. And in terms of keeping her family in the dark, not wanting to burden them, I mean, she would get dressed for work just to keep up the facade, as if she was going to work as normal, when in fact she was sitting at home without pay. And it's a testament to her fortitude that she then, after being subjected to that, went back to her job.
Yeah.
And this is one of the first things that she found.
Let's come back to the story, because, of course, after these heinous and tragic events, we then have a question of how much justice has actually been achieved. Now, let's maybe start with the trial, because on the face of it, it would seem that at least the first layer of those who were involved in this have been held to account. What do you make of the criminal trial, which resulted in convictions for her murder?
Well, there was no trial. They completely avoided the trial. They managed to skirt it through a plea and sentencing agreement. And to be fair to the National Prosecuting Authority, they had very little to work with. And I'm not a torchbearer for Shamila Batoy, and she must take responsibility for the failings of her organization. But in this case, the NPO was served a real lemon by the Hawks. It's like taking a container full of sand and putting it in an oven, baking it, and expecting a cake to come out and then blaming the oven when it doesn't. It was the input in that case that was problematic. So 6 men are convicted and sentenced, and good. They must spend their time behind bars. It's still not enough. Some of those men are eligible for parole next year. So that's an insult to the Deokaran family. And arguably, if the case had been investigated as it should have been, we would have had a trial and we would have had harsher sentences for everyone who played a role in it.
Sure.
So in terms of the hitmen, there's some modicum of justice, but when you understand the complexity and nebulous nature of the way assassinations are planned and then carried out, it's way beyond the 6. There's layers of intermediaries and proxies, and then ultimately you have the people who've ordered it. We've not seen that in 4 years. And when you understand the series of catastrophic missteps in the investigation into her death, it makes you understand why.
You talk us through the Hawks investigation and how that seems to have been one of these catastrophic missteps, and the way that any further inquiry into those who may have ordered this, played a role in orchestrating it, has failed to materialize. Talk us through that.
So I think the most egregious thing that we found, and to be fair, it's not a new revelation in the book. We reported it at News24 in September of 2023 when the hitmen were sentenced, that the police made no effort to digitally examine either her laptop or her cell phone. And that just beggars belief.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a policeman. I'm an investigative journalist. But it's just common sense and logic. If you go through the effort of seizing these devices on the day of the killing, and then you just leave them to gather dust in an evidence store, you're in darkness of your own making. And that became pronounced for me when we digitally examined those devices. And within minutes, typing in Tembisa, the report comes up. The Hawks would have had their own suspect list and a viable motive. No one can tell me that an 850 million rand revenue stream, now we know it's 2.3 billion, is not a viable motive for murder. And the Hawks never looked at that. Now, they will claim that they did, but it's a bald lie. And what's fatal for them is that they had to ask for the laptops back after we'd examined them because they'd been shown up in the press. Now, that to me is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And Babita Deokaran's family have an advocate in me. But what about all of the thousands upon thousands of other people who are murdered? And what happens with those investigations? When the police set themselves a detection rate target of 11%, that means that's their benchmark. That's what they're aiming to achieve, that we will solve 1 in 10 murders. No one should be able to accept that. We cannot be the slow-boiled frog that comes to the point where we say, okay, well, they're doing their best. This is fine. This is dysfunction.
Yeah.
And it manifested here.
Absolutely. And what's scary about it is that the Inkabi phenomenon has almost now provided a veil for those who do orchestrate these things, because even criminal liability gets outsourced to the most immediate hitmen, and the planners are able to continue in secrecy.
I find it astounding that we've now moved over 1,000, close to 1,500 days, and there's still no indication that the police are either keen on finding the mastermind, are allocating resources in order to do this. And by all intents and purposes, this is now a cold case. And that it's devastating to think that these people may never get justice. Because, I mean, this is the epitome of a high-profile case because of its ramifications.
Absolutely.
Murder Babita Deokaran, it sends a message, not only to her family, but to every single civil servant who's willing to say, well, no, not on my watch. I have to raise my hand here somehow.
Every citizen, actually.
And it's a cost with damage that we'll never be able to measure, because how many people decided to stay silent?
Yeah.
And that is really the importance of not only the book, but the investigation, which continues.
One of the other disappointing aspects of accountability is just what has happened to those within the Gauteng health infrastructure who, again, on the face of it, may have been subjected to disciplinary action, but really enjoyed the largesse of special leave and who took the symbolic accountability but really didn't suffer much for it. I mean, that's something that strikes me because it seems to be this recurring theme in government at the moment, where special leave has become the worst punishment you can expect,
while still getting your full salary and benefits.
I think that's what's special about the special leave.
That's very special. And I mean, case in point with the CFO. She's charged with misconduct for 13 purchase orders, which were approved.
Yeah. Remind us of her name.
It's Lorato Maggio.
Yeah.
So she faced 13 charges of misconduct, and it was over 13 purchase orders. We investigated all of those. Each displayed egregious issues. They should have never passed the SCM process, let alone the bid process. Overpriced items, contrived quantities, companies in the same syndicate bidding against one another. But she had a credible defense. Realistically, she's the CFO. How can she be disciplined for charges or purchase orders that happened way below her level?
Sure.
She was never charged with ignoring the report, which was essentially a cover-up. Because after Babita was murdered, there was no forensic investigation.
Yeah.
The frozen money was released. Why was she not charged with that? And that speaks to the intent of the Gauteng Health Department. She was placed on special leave and allowed to resign 2 years later with no sanction. And then at the anniversary of Babita's death over the weekend, we had the head of the SIU telling us about the 4 syndicates that they've identified. And 111 staff members from the Gauteng Department of Health who've taken kickbacks. What a damning indictment on the organization you run.
I mean,
the health MEC in Gauteng should resign tomorrow in shame, but she won't. If it was one person, bad apple,
Yeah, sure.
111 people in this department. This is the ecosystem. It's poisoned.
Sure.
And if you want to look at how that pays off, look at the 700 million rand that they can't spend on cancer patients. You get cancer in this province as an indigent person who relies on the public healthcare system. Start planning your funeral. They cannot help you. And our hospitals are falling apart. And our hospital boards are stocked with politicians. Why? Why are they not stocked with doctors?
Absolutely. I mean, there's been more reporting out of News24 about this Gauteng lab that's supposed to do all this, I think it's pathology.
Yes.
State of the art has been waiting there for years because there's some hold up in the system and you just want to tear your hair out at some point.
And that's the nauseating thing, is that we're confronted with these scandals of corruption and graft. I mean, the MEC in Gauteng giving her friend a contract to provide uniform shirts, plush. But the cost is measured in lives. It's measured by the people who have cancer, who cannot get treatment, who die alone. By trauma victims who get taken to the hospital in the lowest ebb of their life, and there's no medicines or no stock because the stock has either been stolen, or when the stock was ordered, it was never actually delivered, but it was paid for. And I think this happens on a daily basis. What happened to Babita Deokaran and what's happening at Tembisa Hospital is certainly not happening in a vacuum. It's happening every day. This is the state capture we confront in 2025. Different to the sort of narrative and sketch of state capture before. It's every day, small amounts, low scrutiny, and extraction at scale. That's what we're seeing.
That, I think, is an interesting aspect of your book because it takes us inside the way there has been a kind of mutation in corruption. The Gupta story was, I mean, it almost seems innocent now, big business people trying to extract from the president down. Whereas here we have 2 things scare me. One, as you say, is that the numbers are low enough, but they're spread around so many places that it's more sophisticated. But the second is that potentially criminal networks themselves are now at the helm of these enterprises. And I don't mean criminal networks in the figurative sense, in the literal sense.
I think that we have to stop considering procurement fraud, extraction through state contracts as white-collar crime. It's not. There are criminal enterprises behind it, sophisticated, smart, well-resourced enterprises. And Babita is the perfect example, a white-collar crime which ended in murder.
Yeah.
And, they've become so intertwined that, we've seen networks pop up in other state institutions, the same group of individuals. And because there's no accountability, because of the disjointed approach of law enforcement, in an ideal world, we should see these people charged with corruption.
Yeah.
There's people that I've named in News24 and published supporting documents where if a policeman were to take that, formalize the evidence, you charge him with corruption. That's a 15-year jail term on one count. Why have we not seen that? Why have we not seen these corrupt and pliant civil servants rinsed out the system? It's because patronage networks depend on them and they live on. And again, imagine the state of our public healthcare system. Let's just use that as an example. Imagine the state of our public healthcare system if procurement was value for money based. Obviously with the necessary strictures of preferential procurement and BEE. I'm not saying do away with that.
Sure.
What I'm saying is use the system as it's intended to be used to get value for money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are we paying an ANC politician to supply medical goods which are inflated several 100%? It doesn't make sense
at all, especially when these companies, so many of which, have been highlighted, spring up yesterday or they get taken over days before the tender's awarded, and you can just see it's obviously fishy.
It's a complete shell game. But imagine every tax rand that wasn't diverted reached its intended destination.
Yeah, sure. We'd have.
How many lives would we save?
Yeah.
Of people who desperately need healthcare. We wouldn't need the orange man's largesse through grants and aid. We could fund ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Back to the narrative, because your book, of course, details what happened to Babita Deokaran, what happened with the processes to try and get justice for her murder. But probably one of the most interesting parts of the book is the implications of all of this. And I don't even know where to start, but I mean, one place could be Cat Matlala. As we speak right now, currently in a trial for attempted murder in an unrelated event, but actually how unrelated, we don't know yet, because murder weapons recently have now linked some of the hitmen in these cases. But you actually were one of the first people to, and by extension, Babita was probably the first person to identify Cat Matlala and his influence over the Tembisa Hospital itself. Of course, this is big news now. Talk us through that link and that implication, because that traces all the way through to the Mkhwanazi allegations and the commission.
It brings us to the present, but really Babita was the genesis. She placed him for the first time on anyone's radar. And, when she filed her report, she appended a list of companies, and that became our guide. And when I say, Sizwe, we dived into the lives of these people, we ripped everyone's lives apart. And you come across a figure like Cat Matlala, we knew then that he was going to be important. So in terms of the money that he made from Tembisa Hospital, it's 5 million rand in a couple of weeks. Minuscule in the greater scheme of things, but we were able to place him within a syndicate. And we started to understand through our sources and obviously publicly available documents that this was an immensely wealthy man, but someone who also had a very intimidating persona. And, you look at his brushes with the law in the past. He's been arrested for attempted murder, cash and transit heists. He was arrested alongside one of Radovan Kretsch's hitmen, and the charges against him were withdrawn. So this is someone who has fallen foul of the law before. It's not surprising that he's fallen foul of the law now. But what speaks to the patent lack of accountability is that while he was under investigation for procurement fraud, by the police. He wins a tender from the police.
You can't script
I
this,
mean,
man.
there were 14 people on the bid evaluation committee. I wonder if any one of them is able to actually physically dress themselves in the morning, because all it would have taken was a Google search of his name and you would have found our reports because we publicly named him. By that point, the SIU had already said they were going to make criminal referrals against him for fraud. And he's awarded this tender. Now we know the process stank to high heaven. But it's part of his empire. Someone who has an obvious criminal and underworld connection, enriching himself through state procurement, first at Tembisa Hospital, now through the SAPs. And if he skirts trial, we'll follow him and find out where he makes money from next.
What do you make of the launch of the commission? And as we speak, it's just been announced that the commission, which hasn't even started, has now been postponed.
Yes, I think Babita's story can be viewed through the lens of, crime and policing in South Africa. She's a victim of a broken system. And I think we had the Zondo Commission, and they were very light on law enforcement. The focus was on the hawks, burning in Tlemeza and alike, and Richard Mhluli. But if you consider the scale of the corruption in each of the SOEs and the importance of the police and the hawks in terms of political capture, it was thin. And I think at the time there was talk about having a separate commission about the police. And what we've needed is urgent reforms. Perhaps this commission is an opportunity for that. The police cannot investigate themselves. It has to be done by a third party.
Sure. And
I think it's something that all South Africans deserve. Because we deserve to live in a country and feel safe. If you ask a crowd of people, have you ever been a victim of crime? No doubt, most of them will raise their hands.
Absolutely.
It's a sad situation, but we've become accustomed to it. We've come to expect it. And I think if the commission can do any good, it's about ridding the uppermost ranks of the police from corrupt elements and making it serve the people as it was intended to, because currently it's not.
Ready to take your podcast to the next level? At Ayeye Studios, you can film, edit, and release your podcast all in one place. From crisp visuals to clean sound, we've got you covered, and you can even distribute your podcast on YouTube and other platforms. The best part? It's brought to you by the same team that brings you SMWX quality. Are you ready to take your podcast to the next level? Welcome to Ayeye Studios. What did you make of General Mkhwanazi's allegations? Because as you say, the Babita Deokaran story is a story of someone who followed procedure, who ticked all the right boxes and suffered for it. Mkhwanazi's been criticized for just going to the media. But in some ways, that looks like a defense strategy to gain public support so that he could say the things he wanted to say. At the same time, you would probably know better than most, Mkhwanazi himself isn't necessarily an angel either. And is this an attempt to try and paint himself an angel? We don't know. But what did you make of that moment, given how closely you followed policing in this country?
I think it's seismic for what it's produced. When you have a policeman breaking ranks, standing before a bank of cameras and saying, our top ranks have been captured, the minister has been captured by not only business people, but elements of the underworld and drug cartels. Those were his words.
Yeah.
It's seismic. And I think when we consider Mkhwanazi, he's an extremely popular figure because of his approach, which kind of casts due process aside. We should never celebrate that. Due process is there for a reason. You understand why people who are so beaten down by crime will say, good, shoot them, kill them, because that's what he's lauded for. And I think Mkhwanazi is the hero that people want, but not necessarily the hero people need. because of his approach. And, it's easy for me, this lefty journalist, to criticize him, but when you're arrested at a roadblock, you expect to be taken to court. If you've done wrong, you expect to be tried, any crime. When we start raising the specter of extrajudicial killings, it takes us back to a place where we don't want to go.
It is interesting, and we'll just have to see what this commission produces, and I suspect there'll be many twists and turns along the way. Some other figures emerge. We've spoken about Cat Matlala. Can you talk us through some of the other figures who emerge as benefiting from these tender operations? Let me call them that, because you find a few others who are candidates for that label.
Sure. So when we were doing this investigation, obviously we looked at the companies, and then it's daunting. You've got a list of 100 companies. They all appear disparate, but once you peel back a single layer of directorships, you understand exactly who you're dealing with. And we found Rudolf Mazibuko and his family, husband, wife, son, and a cousin, who between them had 17 companies in this armada of medical supply entities. And they made at least 250 million rand from Tembisa Hospital. They were the ones behind Tembisa's billionaire bucket, a plastic bucket worth 150 rand at any Pick and Pay, 10,000 rand a pop. They bought 4, 2 in red and 2 in blue. And it's emblematic of the rampant, inflation of invoices that you're paying for this. There's Selo Sokoko, who's obviously an ANC figure now in Ekurhuleni. He's managed to succeed despite the stench hanging over him.
Can we stop there? Because he was a fascinating figure for me. And I just thought to myself, if we audited every ANC member who also has a directorship, I wonder what we'd find. Because it didn't take long to realize that this was a senior ANC figure who also had these directorships which were getting state money.
Yes, and someone who obviously had sway and influence in the department. So, I mean, he was one of the first people to pique Deokaran's interest. She found this company and she Googled it, and we could see that from her cell phone that she was Googling it and then writing emails about how this is an events company, how can it be making money? What she didn't know was that he had 2 other entities. Now, all of these companies are run from the same house. It's all one operation, and they bid for contracts across the provinces. But they found their heyday at Tembisa. And he was such an interesting figure to go and interview because, Babita had raised issues around payments going to his company, and her boss, Madjo, said, I don't like dealing with politicians, and told her to keep it quiet. So what does that tell you about her complicity? I mean, people can decide for themselves. But, I went and I sat with Sokoko to put all these allegations to him. A very smooth operator. Unctuous actually is a good word to describe him. And whilst I was addressing this with him, he asked me to stop the recording and said, I'll give you bigger stories. There's bigger fish out there. I'm small, and I've got info. And that's the wheeling, dealing that I don't enjoy, and I won't take that from anyone, least of all him. And I understand why he was trying to throw me off, because he'd actually made a whole lot more money than he was willing to admit. And he's become a very wealthy man because of it. And now he's still a success in politics. A couple of years of dry business dealings, and he's back with the Gauteng Department of Health, delivering toilet paper by the truckload.
It was fascinating to me to see the role President Cyril Ramaphosa plays in your book. Quite a brave step. It comes late, but I think this could be some of the most revelatory stuff in the book. I mean, Morgan Mamela. We've heard reports of his relationship with the president as a nephew, but you really do verify that, and talk to us about his relationship with this tender world?
So I think we must be fair to the president. The president in parliament has said, I don't know this man. I don't have any evidence to counter what his narrative is that this is a distant relative from a previous marriage and a big family, that they've got no relationship with him.
Sure.
That said,
his spokesperson repeats that.
Spokesperson repeats it. Then again, he's a very good friend of Bajani Chauke, who's the president's principal political advisor.
You showed that they lived in a similar complex or something.
They were neighbors, a house apart, and they also spent a lot of time together, as much as Mr. Chauke would disagree with that. But Morgan was framed to us when we managed to ferret out some sources in the health department as the Don of Tembisa. He was known simply by Morgan, or Mo. And we were told by our sources that nothing moves in that place without him. That he's the real Don. That's what he was called, the Don of Tembisa. And he, again, had a fleet of companies. Not only is in his name, but we managed to unearth people connected to him, former love interests, neighbors, his cousin. And he's really one of the single largest beneficiaries of all of the money that was extracted from Tembisa. At least 430 million rand. And it's just an unfathomable amount of money. And then we tried to understand what he spent it on. And then you found the mansions, Camps Bay, Bantry Bay, his apartments being featured on top billing. Tembisa Hospital likely paid for that bespoke furniture, the curated down to the knives and forks. It's disgusting, that amount of wealth. And he's a central actor, and we placed Matlala in his syndicate. Matlala was seen as his consigliere, the muscle behind Morgan, with a penchant for supercars and the like. And so that's where he fits in. And then probably the most intelligent extractor of all of them was Stefan Govindraju. Now, his syndicate's remarkable because of just the manner in which it was set up. He'd placed proxy directors at the helm of 5 companies, and it was so easy to spot the pattern. The companies were all formed on the same day. The registration numbers were almost sequential, and these directors had, no one could reach them. I tried phoning, going to their workplaces. They all had day jobs, but they were running these medical empires that were banking millions in weeks and living in back rooms. And that just tells you this person is a front. They're getting a small cut, and there's someone else behind this. And we found 60 companies that one man controlled that were all in business with Tembisa Hospital. At least 500 million rand.
Sheesh.
And I keep just rattling off these numbers, but think about what that looks like physically, like that physical money. It would fill this room. That was intended for patients of Tembisa. It never found its way to them.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but my mind is boggled by this Mamela situation. All of the Govindraju has 60 companies. That's a lot of work to just have 60 companies on the go at the same time, but with these shell games going on. To what extent do you think this goes right to the top? You have a chapter on friends in high places. How much do you think our political leaders know about these cartels that are running the country at this point, or parts of it?
It's a very difficult question to answer about individual knowledge. But there must be an awareness. When you look at characters like Edwin Sodi, and Morgan Mamela was at his birthday, along with Cat Matlala. These are people who hold court together. They're friends. And all of these, infamous tenderpreneurs who've been in the news for extracting cash, there must be an awareness that this is happening not only in these high-profile cases that caught media attention, but everywhere and every day. And we'll never see it because what the state has also done is it's adopted a posture of being opaque. The only reason why we were able to tell Babita's story in the way that we were was because we had her laptop. No amount of cajoling, threatening, legal action will get those payment records out the Gauteng Department of Health. It's public money. You and I pay tax for that expenditure. In a just, sane world, we would be entitled to that. How can a citizen not be?
Absolutely.
Entitled to understand where and how the government spends its money. It's impossible to get those documents. But when we had her laptop, we had them dead to rights because they couldn't deny it. They tried in the beginning to defend their people, obviously protect them. And it became very difficult because we just wouldn't let up. Because we had this, we worked on it for months. And we didn't let it go all at once. We gave it to them by drip. So, because we know the South African news cycle, stories disappear.
Absolutely.
This is one that was never going to go away just because of the sheer scale of it and the detail with which we could tell it. And we made it impossible for them, and then they stopped talking to us. But when you consider that this is likely happening elsewhere, you'd think, oh, wow, the Gauteng Health MEC, come look at our books. We'll give you anything you want. Maybe you'll find something. Help us recover money. No, absolutely not. It's hubris and arrogance. And it's protecting other networks. Yeah. Whether that's being done willingly, I don't know.
Do you think it's fair at this point to say that cartels are running the country or some significant part of it?
Cartels are crippling this country. And that's what the shadow state is as a concept.
Sure.
It's this parallel world where we have expenditure intended for this hospital. It doesn't go there. It goes elsewhere. Through the connivance of Gauteng Health staff, because they're part of the ecosystem, they enable it. Without people on the inside, this would never have been possible. And you buy the entire value chain. And then once the money's out and the people of Tembisa are suffering, you go and you must spend your loot. So it's then enabled by estate agents, luxury car dealers, lawyers, accountants, help you hide the money. And then when someone threatens your revenue stream, you're in the underworld already. You go to your enforcers and they deal with the problem. That's the shadow state.
Yeah. And
we have Babita's story, which is, vivid in its detail because of the information that we had. This happens every day. There are other people who fall victim to this. We get contacted as journalists by whistleblowers every day. Please help me. I'm desperate. And it's just assailing in its scale.
Yeah. And the shadow state becomes a very useful device for us to understand what's going on, because we're used to having a state, a government that we can see, but unseen is some kind of parallel entity that seems to be growing in sophistication and coordination, which increasingly seems to be calling, if not all, if not even most, many important shots.
Absolutely. And it's easy, for me at least, to understand why. State has buying power of 1 trillion rand approximately per annum. That's the trough.
Sure.
That's available.
Sure.
Little wonder that it would be targeted.
Yeah.
It's proven so effective in the past. Such lax controls and measures exist today, so it's enabled further.
Yeah.
Why in 2025 Sizwe do you think we have a paper-based procurement system?
Yeah, that shocked me.
Doesn't make sense to me either. These are meant to be checks against corruption. It's easier to do that with an electronic portal, especially when you consider the method of operation that was employed here. Fake, forged documents. You couldn't get by that in an electronic system.
Absolutely.
And then when people come calling for the documents, the hospital gets set on fire. That wouldn't happen. But where's the political will to change it?
Sure.
I don't see it.
You and me both, unfortunately. I mean, there are some stories of people who stood up at the right time. Within Gauteng Health, I believe you refer to, it's Dr. Nomonde Tobejane, is it?
Noluchungu.
Yeah. It's Dr. Nomonde Noluchungu. let's focus on her because in some ways she has a better story than many of the other officials.
Yeah, she was parachuted into the department after the PPE scandal that had obviously seen the last her predecessor axed.
Yeah.
And she walked into a department in complete disarray. And I feel sorry for her because I do believe she was a well-intentioned civil servant who wanted to do the right thing. And I mean, she faced backlash for trying to follow up on what by that point was a public scandal. You know, we'd broken the news. It was impossible to ignore. You know, the politicians, even if it's placatory, must now take action.
Yeah. So
she must discipline the staff. And she was threatened. And it speaks to a larger issue. You know, go back in time 10 years and see how long a HOD survives in the Gauteng Department of Health. Less than 2 years. So where's the continuity of service? Where's the institutional knowledge? It doesn't exist. You know, they've either left under a cloud or because they've been run out in Nola Chungu's case because, you know, she didn't need to deal with that. You know, for her, it wasn't worth risking her life. I understand that. You know, I don't think less of her because of that.
Sure.
It's very different when your own life is on the line, and it gives you perspective when you start making decisions.
Yeah.
But you know, there are good people. How long those good people will last in the den of iniquity remains to be seen. But when we lose them, when we lose the people who are willing to take the risks, willing to say, no, I'm not signing this, and I'll take the lashes, then we're in trouble. Then it's mafia state backslide.
Yeah. The SIU, what are your thoughts on the role they've played?
I feel that the SIU has become something of a catch-all. You see how busy they've been because corruption is so rampant. Yeah. With a staff complement of 700. Again, why are they shackled by presidential proclamation? Why can't they investigate of their own accord? Why do we delay things by months just to get presidential proclamation? Because that's how long it takes. You must gazette it. It must have concurrence of the DOJ, all of these bureaucratic hoops. And, you know, I feel like they are doing the best possible with what they have.
Yeah.
Also understanding that a lot of information has been withheld from them by the Gauteng Department of Health. And that's after the scandal broke.
Yeah.
And you're looking now at industrial scale extraction and money laundering. Investigating forensically more than 10,000 individual transactions, which go to shells and then move to other shells. And every time you find a new shell, you must subpoena 30 new bank accounts for that one shell company. It's mammoth, the size of this thing. And it gives you a sense of why it's taken a long time.
Yeah.
Because I think really we're yet to understand the true scale of this and how far it stretches.
You haven't received direct threats, but I mean, reading the book, you haven't really needed to either. I mean, how are you feeling about taking such a brave stance in such a violent and troubled country and revealing all of this stuff?
I don't think it's particularly brave. I must be honest, I've shit myself quite regularly. It's I'd be lying if I said there were never times where I was scared.
Yeah.
I haven't had a comfortable drive in 4 years. But the reality for me and why I think I've pursued this and will continue to pursue it is that this is bigger than me. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than Babita Deokaran. And if she laid down her life, filed a report, raised her concerns, it was covered up. And, you know, when I found that document, you kind of get a sense of, okay, this is what a woman died for. Now I'm inheriting this danger. And there were times where, you know, you find yourself second guessing yourself when you think, okay, well, you know, am I going to meet my end in a car? What happens to my wife when I die? Is she catered for? Is she cared for? What happens if they go after my parents? You know? But it's too important a story not to tell. And then if you keep quiet about it, they've won. And I mean, I believe that journalism is what I was meant to do, investigative journalism. And I'm very lucky to be able to do the job that I have. And it comes with an immense responsibility. And I take that very seriously. it angers me when people like those we've named in the book, through fraud and murder, have climbed their way to the top. It angers me when they succeed. And I think it should anger all of us. We must stop deifying these tenderpreneurs. They celebrate it. And it's theft. They may as well be wearing balaclavas. And that's something that I wouldn't abide by. And I mean, I was lucky to have the support of my company, because very rare will you find an instance where you can be so dedicated to a single issue. Not that the gravity of it was any lessened, but to stay on one story for so long.
How did you get all those whiteboards into the building?
Oh, it was a struggle. Classic case of I didn't measure it before I bought it, and we have this massive whiteboard to plot out all these connections, and then I can't even get it up the stairs. So that was a bit of a misstep. But looking back, there's nothing I would do differently. I would do it again because it's important.
Jeff Wicks, this is an incredibly important book. Thank you for the work you did in putting it together, and the very important journalistic work that you've done in bringing the story to light before the nation. All the best with the book and the future investigations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching another episode of SMWX. Please make sure that you get yourself a copy of The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die, because we've merely scratched the surface of some of the revelations that are found within its pages. Help us get to 300,000 subscribers. That's our next milestone. And keep it locked on SMWX. Aye.
Na na na.